We'll be starting in 1 minute, please. Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome. We do have to make a prompt start because it is being live streamed. So, thank you everyone for joining us today and for those joining us on the live stream. Just want to go through the basic housekeeping before we start. Fire alarm, no doubt it will not ring. I'm making sure it will not ring. So you follow the signs to the nearest exit, which is basically the main entrance you came in from. So if you head to the Bertram Russell bust of this man in the Red Lion Square, that's where we will meet if the fire alarm does go off. The toilets, including an accessible toilet, are on the right there. It's just, you can either go through there, turn right, or through those doors. Just want to make sure we're going to ask, there's no filming or photography allowed, please, for safety and security reasons. We are live on YouTube, so we won't be showing the audience, but if you are near the front, you may be visible. So if you don't want to be visible, I suggest you move further back, just to be on the safe side. We've also asked journalists and professional photographers to respect this and to avoid capturing anybody's face that is attending this event. We'd love to get a discussion going, trending on Twitter. So if you are tweeting, it's hashtag students for sale. If you haven't already done so, we've got a free Wi-Fi, and that is Conway Hall events, and the password being events 2017 @. So you should be able to get in with that login and password. I think it's up there, yeah. Okay, at the end of the morning session and the afternoon session, we've allowed time for questions and discussions. If you want to ask a question, we've got Slido set up, this newfangled thing, technology set up. So if you're au fait with that and good with technology, go ahead on your phone, submit your questions as you go along using your phone. You just go to slido.com and enter the code Nordic Model 3. Now that code is case sensitive, so just be careful with that. You'll be permitted to ask your question, prompted to ask your question. Please keep it short, and please make it clear if you can for which of the speakers you're asking. You can give us your name, or you can be anonymous, which is up to you. We'll pick out a few to put them to the panel before lunch, and there will also be a chance to ask questions from within the hall. There will be roving mics going around on the floor. Just a warning, really. Some of the things, the content that you hear, you may find distressing. It's not gratuitous. Basically, we need to understand what we're dealing with. But we understand if you do need to leave the room, you're welcome to do so. There is a cafe also, or the garden you could go to if you need to take a breath or time out. We do have volunteers from Nordic Model Now available if you do want to chat. or just to have a presence there while you're feeling a bit outsourced. But they're there if you want them. If not, just take a breath and look after yourself. Now, we're aiming to break for lunch approximately 1:10, and I will be keeping to time quite strictly. So, yeah, I'm going to try not to wag my finger. I have a tendency to do that. So now, please join me in welcoming this morning's speakers to the stage. Thank you, speakers.
Interrogated. Okay, so I've got the privilege of opening the conference this morning. Thanks everyone for supporting this absolutely crucial conference. My name's Fiona Broadfoot. I've been in activism for a lot of years. I am the founder and CEO of the Build a Girl project, and I work to build or support girls to build a unique self and recover from sexual violence and abuse. Work with girls as young as 6. And my passion comes from my own experience of childhood abuse and being in the sex trade for 11 years. I'm still traumatised now. There's no two ways about it. And in fact, the further I've got away from the sex trade, the more raw and kind of hard it is to reflect on a life. 11 years of being objectified for men's sexual gain is pretty tough. Because we disassociate from ourselves, firstly. We lose our identity immediately. And we have a working name, and we shut down from anything that's loving, cherishing, caring. I became quite hard-faced to cope with the relentless 10 men a day scene. And 10 was, your average. You might have 15 or 20. You might have 5 on a bad day. But it's a lot of men. The grooming starts very young. Now I work with girls that call themselves hot at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age because they are totally groomed by a society to be sexual and ready. Porn and sex ready, or abuse ready, not sex. It's not sex. From very, very, very young ages. I have a particular passion for working class kids. I work on estates in the UK that, particularly in my city, but I've worked nationally and internationally, but kids who come from families that don't work, don't have education, quite very poor health. In fact, the biggest estate I work on, the average life expectancy for women is about 40. And they're usually already grandmas by that age. It's all hidden. It's a hidden society. It's becoming more and more apparent with social media, whatever else. And these girls, because of the postcodes alone, are written off. They're just written off from a very young age. So you're constantly having to, you know, promote them, give them the, or support them to build the self-esteem so that they can fight this notion that to be a sex worker is great. It's a great career and it's an option and it's viable and it's sexy and it's wonderful. Not on my watch. Absolutely not on my watch. One girl that I'm working with, she's working really hard at school to be a barrister, but she does face a lot of discrimination from teachers, because of her class, because of her poverty, because of, you know, by the way, sorry, Leslie's taking photos of me I did ask for permission, so it won't be going public, it's just for our work and stuff, so. Thanks, Shally, for... so building girls, it's a mammoth task. It's an absolutely mammoth task. They tell me on their way to school, they are wolf whistled at, they are already being leered at by, you know, men on their way to work, you know, dustbin men, you name it. Lorry drivers, you know, they're getting the kicks in the schoolgirl uniforms. And in fact, that was the single biggest request from men who bought me. I was 15 when I entered the sex trade, but they still wanted to make me younger. They still wanted to, you know, treat me like I was a little girl, and would often ask to have your pubes shaved, blah, blah. I don't write my speeches. I never write my speeches because I get traumatised from writing the speech. So this is just me, it's never very orderly. It's just me, you know. Me with no academic qualifications whatsoever, but plenty in the school of hard knocks, that's for sure. So giving these girls an opportunity to be better educated, to have better options, and then they go to university, and they get sold the notion that because they won't have their parents giving them a bit of a top-up every month. They won't have anybody to turn to when they're struggling to feed themselves because we don't support further education and we don't offer free further education for our girls and young women. They are absolutely the ones that are going to be groomed straight down that road. They've already been prepped because they've been sexually abused. They're already not waiting, but, you know, society has them ready for the men, for the demand, the invisible demand that we absolutely never, ever bother with. So the Nordic model, I know other women are going to speak about their experiences of the Nordic model and stuff, but we definitely need to get our heads around this shit. We need to call out the sex work is work brigade. We need to stop promoting, you know, that men have the right to sexual access to women as and when they freaking want, whatever age they want, whatever size they want, whatever position they want, or whatever, you know. We absolutely have to call this out. Because while ever we objectify and have women and girls ready, and in my city it's £5. £5 to do what the fuck you want to another human, you know, to a vulnerable girl or woman. £5. They're probably going to have 20 men a day, 30 men a day. And like I said, I can't live my life. I can't be part of and support that notion, not for 1 second, not for any girl, none, absolutely none. And I feel that a lot of the vulnerable young women in universities, they feel that that's empowerment, but for a very, very short time. And once you say, I'm okay, I used to say I won't work in an office for £2 an hour. I think that was minimum wage when I were in the life. And I would tell everybody, I'm fine, I'm okay. And I would scrub myself till I bled every night in the bath in boiling hot water. Because no way is it ever okay. It's never, ever okay. I'm going to stop now because I'm going to do a little bit more this afternoon. Yeah, just thanks for coming and call it out. Please call it out. Everywhere, call it out.
So I'm just going to go up there because I want to be able to read my speech. So, good morning, London. I'm Chelsea GEDDES. I've come here today from the other side of the world to share an insight with you into what prostitution really is. My experience and expertise comes from more than 20 years in this industry. In New Zealand, where no doubt you will have heard it said, we have the best and most progressive prostitution reform law and policy, having opted for full decriminalisation of the sex trade back in 2003. The criminalisation of prostitution, we are told, being the root cause of associated exploitation and harm. On the flip side, decriminalised prostitution is being aggressively marketed to young girls as sex work, as an equal exchange between consenting adults, as harmless fun for men, and even as empowering for women. Well, it's just not. I remember reading advertisements for a strip club and brothel workers when I was a child in my early teens. They were in the normal jobs section of the newspaper. These ads stood in stark contrast to the rest of the jobs on the page. The Showgirls Club in my city of Auckland advertised for bikini dancers, saying you get to keep your bikini on and make a lot of tips. No experience or dancing skills were required, just easy money. Femme Fatale, the largest and most well-known brothel in Auckland, and indeed the whole country, advertised for women to massage and rub shoulders with friendly gentlemen. No experience required. They boasted a pay rate of up to $2,000 per shift, saying they prefer to see themselves as a stepping stone to bigger and better things. All other jobs in the newspaper, they didn't compare. They required qualifications, experience, and offered up far less money. You had to be 18 to apply for these jobs, but by the time of my 15th birthday, I was already being prostituted in a small live-in computer shop next to my high school, owned by the pedophile Brian Edward Avent, who took me in after I became a homeless youth. You see, New Zealand has the highest rates of domestic and family violence in the developed world, the OECD, and my home life was violent. I was a good kid, a straight-A student, but my parents were old-fashioned and very strict. Normal teenage things that all my friends were allowed to do, I simply was not. There is no way to ground a kid who is only allowed to leave the house for school and church anyway, so all punishments were physical. I had no idea what kind of people were waiting for me out in the real world. I just felt that no one else was treated like I was at home, and the black and blue bruises all over my body told me my parents were the ones I needed protecting from. When I was finally kicked out of home for sneaking out to see my friends, I decided I didn't need parents anyway. I wanted to stay in school, and I needed an adult to take me in permanently. In retrospect, I should have gone to child, youth and family services and been placed into a caring foster home. But I was a teenager and I didn't want new parents. I wanted to look after myself. I just needed somewhere to live. I missed my pet cat dreadfully, and I couldn't go back to pick her up without somewhere to bring her home with me to. A school friend introduced me to Brian. Brian would later be convicted of 47 charges related to sexual assault against 14 boys aged 9 to 16. I was only 16 at the time of his arrest, but somehow didn't factor as a victim of rape and abuse by this man, because without him I was homeless. I was without parents and had nowhere to go. I had plotted to take his home video collection evidencing his crimes to the police the day I could move out, but that day would not come until I could get a job and pay rent to live somewhere else. I was thus labelled a prostitute. Reading the job ads in the newspaper every day inspired my goal in bikini dancing as my way out. As well as sexually abusing me himself, Brian used me as bait for the boys. He made them all practice sexual acts on my body and filmed them. It was physically uncomfortable, unbearable, and I squirmed and reeled back, but it didn't help. He was also psychologically tormenting. I was the only female and was treated as a freak show of the developing female body. I was routinely humiliated. I would climb up onto the hand basin to wash my body in the toilet downstairs, because whenever I'd used the shower in the bathroom upstairs, washed myself, picked my nose, bent over to shave my legs, I had stepped out of the shower only to find a camcorder with its bright red light staring right back at me the whole time. He would show the video to the boys, and they all laughed and made fun of me, while oogling my naked body and making lewd comments. I was the joke. I focused myself on dieting so that I would be thinner than Kate Moss by the time I was 18 and walked into Showgirls for a job bikini dancing. And I was 5'6" and 46 kgs. I had reached my first goal. I thought it would be glamorous, like Las Vegas dancers I'd seen on TV with big feathers and sequins and smiling people having a great time, giving me bunches of money for just being fabulous. Then my entire life of abuse could come to an end and I'd have a new future. I planned to finish school and then put myself through university, to have the money to not need a student loan going deep into debt, to get my Bachelor of Science in Physics and have a worthwhile career. I wrote out my master plan, which included getting married before age 21, graduating university, buying a home, all my life goals. But the strip club was not glamorous or classy, and people were not shoving tons of money at me. I began tabletop dancing in my little outfits and heavy makeup for drunken, rude, handsy men waving cigarettes which burned my bum, and they asked for private dances. As it turns out, you don't make any money bikini dancing and keeping your bikini on like the advertisement said. You had to go into a small room with these guys with no witnesses and take all your clothes off to get money. It was the same for all the other girls. And since you're doing that now, you also have to dance on the stage in front of a crowd and get naked there too. The only dance instruction received was dance for 3 songs and be naked by the end. The management were demanding they took 20% of all money earned and paid no wage. When smoking in bars was banned, I took it up because only smokers got to put on a coat, go outside and have a break. The men were worse. They would hold out a $1 showgirl's bill, which is the club currency, and ask, "What will you do for this?" After I'd just danced naked in front of them. What more could they possibly want before handing over one measly dollar? That's 50 pence in your currency. They would assault girls by sticking a finger up them while on stage or by putting their hands on your breasts. Sometimes girls' drinks were spiked and rape only narrowly avoided. During this time, I met a boyfriend who was friends with one of the waitresses. He was spending all my money and didn't help me with rent or bills either. I had savings goals, so I left and went to Femme Fatale to rub shoulders with friendly gentlemen, earn $2,000 a shift, and have a stepping stone to bigger and better things. They were 12-hour shifts. The men paid $250. The club took their cut of $150. Then the club charged me a $40 shift fee, a $40 advertising fee, and $20 for condoms and lube, making the first booking of the night a freebie for which I was paid nothing. This is standard. There weren't any friendly gentlemen. These were rapists. Even accepting that you had to have sex, they constantly pressured and forced more. They rip condoms off, they try to kiss you and shove their tongue down your throat, they viciously bite necks and nipples, smack and swear at you. They ask for discounts, they want to do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, but they don't want to pay twice, 3 times or 4 times. I read some literature produced by the NZPC, that's the New Zealand Prostitutes Collective, who are supposedly our workers' union. The first impression they gave me was if we could convince the men that we were professionals providing a service like any other job, that they would treat us better, that there would no longer be stigma, and that stigma is what caused the harms we experienced. This does not work. Being polite, professional, and getting the job done efficiently means the men complain that you were clinical and want their money back. Clinical is apparently unacceptable because this is not a clinic, I was not a health professional, and these people were not looking to buy a service like any other job. They were looking to sexually harass, rape, abuse, violate and degrade attractive young women, and they paid to get away with it. Even that they often did begrudgingly. I was to be dominated by men and they were going to do whatever they wanted to me, while I struggled to uphold a modicum of health and safety, protect myself from injury, and hold on to my dignity. During this constant battle, I was to humour and lie to these men that were there to use us, that they were somehow interesting, and that we weren't completely disgusted by them. Especially when they would say things purposely to upset us, I just had to not let them see that it got to me, even if it did. They are on some power trip, that's what they come in for. And with all these complaints, I was still the #1 rated lady on Femme Fatale's website for many years. On a busy shift, I might have 7 or 8 bookings, making my genitals red, raw, and swollen. No one was earning $2,000 a shift. And even at the end of the shift, when we are paid out, there was no guarantee they'd hand over our money. They might write on an envelope that they owe us X amount of dollars, so we have to come in and work another shift to get it. Sometimes it built up for a long time, and I worried if I'd be paid at all. Ugly, smelly, fat, drug-addled men pounded away on top of me, dripping cold sweat onto my skin and in my eyes. I got ear infections because I would turn my head so they couldn't try and kiss me, and they would pant moisture into my eardrum instead. All you can do is continue to firmly state your boundaries while trying not to make them angry. One guy smacked my ass hard, and that day I couldn't help smacking him back in the face. He left throwing a tantrum to get his money back from the front desk as I yelled down the hallway to him, "You shouldn't hit people if you can't handle being hit back." I didn't even get paid for what he did to me because he demanded his money back. Some men were easier compared to others, but they were all ultimately the same. My human rights to bodily integrity, safety, free expression, to not endure torture, had been sold. The brothel streams porn to the rooms, which encouraged the men to pressure us for any number of bizarre, dangerous, unhygienic, and degrading acts against our bodies, because they're seeing those other poor girls experience them on screen. I learnt to, when I was not already too sore, twist my body posture into the most painful position during, because it seems that the more painful it was for me, the faster they came, and the faster I could get them to fuck off out of the room. Doing maths in my head helped distract me from thinking about what was happening, so I would count how many hours I'd booked so far, how much money I'd made minus fees, what I planned to buy when I left, how much more I needed, how many more bookings that is. Without being noticed, I'd glance at my watch and count down the minutes. I would go home to bed with visions of 100 men's faces morphing into each other in front of my eyes, hovering over me, and I'd be jolted awake by them. I would kick and punch in my sleep. When I stayed at a friend from the brothel's place after we'd finished a shift, I saw that she did it too. In New Zealand brothels, under decriminalisation, women are told they're independent contractors and responsible for paying their own tax, but they won't be given any independent contractor freedoms. You don't get to choose the rate charged for you. You don't get to choose when or where you will work or who you will see. If you are thought to be working on your own without the brothel taking a cut, they will fire you or steal money from your pay. When I was at another brothel called 133, the management deducted hundreds of dollars from my pay for smoking a cigarette in a car in the car park, even though the car belonged to another girl from the club, and she and I were just sitting in it because it was raining. These businesses lie. They lure you in, they trick you and trap you. Women in brothels will be treated like employees, except they won't get any employee rights. No ACC, that's our accident and injury compensation scheme. No reliable wage, no sick leave, nothing. In the NZPC handbook, they include a table with questions and scores to help you determine whether you are an employee or an independent contractor. But the only way to really resolve it is to go to court. As far as I'm aware, no one has ever done this. Why would anyone want to, especially when it seems there's a chance they might rule against you and bill you for a backlog of taxes as an independent contractor that you can't pay? In New Zealand brothels, under decriminalisation, police can't help anyone. The men can do absolutely anything short of killing someone and nothing will be done. I have gone to the police station after being punched in the head and concussed by a really large man who was verbally abusing a young new girl in the lounge. She was sitting there looking terrified. I told him to leave her alone. He laughed and asked me, "Do you want to die?" So I took a step closer and said yes. The police station is just around the corner from the brothel. So with my spinning head, I and a few of the girls walked over and told them about the attack. He had also stolen my purse. They didn't do a single thing, just sent us away. Told me to look in the public rubbish bins to see if he'd thrown my purse in one. My best friend was overdosed with GHB by a man who booked her. Then he must have panicked and overdosed himself too, or he was already about to OD just from overindulging. When they were both discovered unconscious, the manager was crying because my best friend wasn't breathing, but she couldn't call an ambulance in case they sent police too. The boss's apparent number one rule is no police ever, the mark of any truly legitimate businessman. Luckily, one of the other girls called an ambulance anyway. My friend died in the ambulance but was resuscitated twice. They were both taken to the critical care ward at the hospital and survived. There was a small something in the news about an ambulance at the brothel location with no details, and a response from NZPC, hope everyone feels better in the morning. Never mind that the brothel policy would have ended with dead bodies if it was followed. Never mind that my best friend went home in the afternoon to be beaten by her boyfriend for it. She remains trapped in prostitution to this day, despite having a university degree, because of her addiction to home-baked heroin to ease the pain of prostitution. It's somewhere between hard and impossible to succeed at university while working until 6 a.m. under these conditions, switching back and forth from being awake all day to being awake all night, not making friends at uni because you can never go out when invited on Friday or Saturday nights, as these are the money-making nights. Doing drugs with gang members because you'd rather sit there doing that and keep them talking than have to get on top of them. Gang members frequent all of Auckland's brothels. They specifically target prostituted women to get them addicted to methamphetamines so that they can make money off of their abuse of prostituted women by selling them drugs for more money than they pay to rape them. Decriminalised prostitution also negatively impacts prostituted women in ways unrelated to the prostitution itself. When I had briefly left prostitution to pursue a relationship with a man named Ben, who told me he loved me, and I thought I loved too, he physically assaulted me by strangulation up against a wall during an argument because I had refused to dress up slutty and be degraded for him. I had a mini stroke 2 days later, surely caused by the event, and a massive handprint bruise on my neck. In court, after police pressed charges, my ex-boyfriend had come up with a story to excuse the strangulation, and his story was that I was some kind of sexual deviant who had wanted to be strangled and that the incident occurred during sex. He was able to bring up my history and prostitution as evidence supporting his story against me and to paint me in this light in front of the entire courtroom. I was not, however, allowed to bring up any of his previous charges I'd found out about from police for domestic violence against his previous partners, and I was not allowed to bring up that he had violated his conditions after arrest by stalking me and drinking and had spent the past few days in remand. It's because prostitution is decriminalised that he had ammunition against me in court. He was found guilty by the jury, but sentenced to only 3 months home detention. I could have died, and if I had and was not there to defend myself against these allegations, he might have got away with it entirely. Female students have the sex industry's target on their back. They're young and attractive, and they are financially strapped at a point in life where they seek to break away from family and gain a new independence. Plus, they're ambitious. The sex industry's propaganda machine could potentially derail a whole generation of women's success, snatching young women on the brink of greatness, capable of forging real careers in fields they're interested in and have talent for, stealing them away from all that to be ground up in the machine to serve male orgasms. However long you originally planned to be in prostitution, you will be stuck there longer. This is something even the NZPC admit. Over this time, you will not be gaining any real-world job skills or experience. You will not be advancing or getting promotions. You will miss out on the life you deserve to be living in safety, financial security, with lots of friends and healthy relationships. It is no stepping stone to bigger and better things. Common experience when it comes to exiting prostitution is a feeling of sunken costs. When you have suffered so much already, how can you leave before achieving anything from it? Without that degree, without that house, what would you even do? How would you explain your absence from the workforce for so long in a job interview? Integrating back into society is not an easy task, and the job seeker benefit is not designed to sustain life for any great length of time. That's not what it's for, and you cannot survive that way. At one point during my time in prostitution, having dropped out of uni, not achieved anything in my master plan, and having shrunken my scope of ambition down to just survival for many years, I decided to find a new place to live, somewhere nicer where my home wouldn't be repeatedly burglarized while out all night, and to see a psychiatrist. I wanted to focus on my goals again, give uni a second try, but only after resolving whatever was wrong with me that stopped me from succeeding the first time. Since sex work was apparently a job like any other, which certain self-identified feminists patted themselves loudly on the back for defending, and no excuse for the failure in my life, then it must have been me. I had been reading psychology texts online, trying to decipher the problem myself, and decided I had attention deficit disorder or something, and that this was why I failed with school. Because I was good at my subjects once, I got straight A's, top in the class in high school, but I struggled with motivation and work output, and I started falling behind in university. Unfortunately, to afford this healing endeavour, I had to go into the brothel a lot more often. Psychiatrists are not cheap. I told the psychiatrist after a 10-minute meeting that I think I have ADD. He told me, no, I didn't. I said, okay, what about BPD? And he agreed. So I was organised to see a psychologist to do DBT regularly, a type of talking therapy that's based on cognitive behavioural therapy. I requested someone who wouldn't judge me for being a prostitute. I was paired up with a very friendly woman who said something along the lines of it being a choice and that she thinks we would both agree on that. I didn't respond. I just went quiet, not knowing what to say. In my own time, I thought about what she had said to me. I realised that this is what's being said by the propaganda to facilitate a massive switch of blame from the perpetrators of the abuse onto the victims. The unspoken part of "it's a woman's choice" is, therefore it's her fault. I had started researching prostitution online, and I started saying online the things I wasn't allowed to express in real life, about my life circumstances and about prostitution. I learned that I meet the criteria in international law under the Palermo Protocol of being a victim of sex trafficking. That's the UN convention that was designed to clamp down on trafficking. Of the hundreds of women I met during my years in prostitution, most, if not all of them, meet the criteria too. But this is clearly not understood by the New Zealand government. They decided to decriminalise all that happens to women and girls in prostitution. They turn a blind eye to them and take no responsibility for them, their own citizens. I've been speaking out against prostitution since around 2009, and I've been fully exited from prostitution since 2021. I wish I could have stood and fought for my country to get the Nordic model of prostitution reform, which reflects the reality of prostitution as sexual abuse and exploitation, holds the abusers, the pimps, traffickers and buyers criminally responsible, allowing survivors to access justice and provide support services to its victims rather than gaslighting them into thinking there's something wrong with them because they don't feel empowered when men violate them. But I was only 14 at the time of our prostitution reform in 2003, and I had never heard of the Nordic model. The argument seemed to be whether prostituted women should be criminalised or if prostitution should be decriminalised. It didn't leave room for a third option. I knew I was not a criminal, that I wasn't the one who had ever committed any kind of crime against anyone. It just never occurred to me that the system could ever truly be on our side. The NZPC, as an organisation set up specifically to fight for the full decriminalisation model, does not offer up any information about the Nordic model to the prostituted people it claims to serve. Everyone prostituted alongside me, who I had spoken to about the Nordic model, had never heard of it before. Aside from some fears or worry that they might not be able to earn the money they need and that they might still be stuck, they all agreed it was ultimately the right way to deal with prostitution. On the slide is an excerpt from the New Workers Kit book that the NZPC hands out, even to underage children, with pages giving tips on how to endure unwanted anal sex. There are also pages pathologizing any negative effects of sexual abuse as a made-up condition they label sex worker burnout syndrome. This is being used to groom women into accepting severe abuse. I'm here because I want the people of the UK to see this for themselves, to hear the voices of women prostituted under the decriminalisation model. Please don't make the same mistake New Zealand did.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to sit here. So my name's Lulu, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm going to start with some quotes. So, yeah, so how to be a sex worker, advice for freshers. So this is by the time. So a stand at the Brighton University event offered student tips on how to be prostitutes. The next quote is from Cardi B, who's like a very current popular artist, and this is a tweet from her. So, might get rich on my OnlyFans. Yeah, I'm gonna not say certain things. Might jack my beep on cam with my beep. I need a good fucking beat today. I want to rap today. And then the next is from Seeking. So they're like the most popular like sugar dating website, and this is a quote from their website. So Seeking is a luxury dating site for successful and attractive singles. Elevating your experience is the foundation of Seeking, where you will discover the connections, passions, and expectations you desire every step of the way. With such a diverse range of people and passions, we provide a safe environment to explore, discover, and evolve what love truly means to you. Yeah, funny. I'm going to talk about the grooming of young women and university students into the sex industry in its new and emerging forms, namely OnlyFans and sugar dating. So I'm going to talk about the dangers of OnlyFans and sugar dating and how young women and students are lured into these forms of prostitution and pornography. So I started with song lyrics and newspaper headlines, and that's to call out the media, who are constantly bombarding young people with glorified stories of OnlyFans and sugar dating, essentially to encourage themselves to sell themselves in the same way. So what is sugar dating and OnlyFans? So for those who aren't aware, here's a quick summary. So sugar dating is essentially, it's a very sanitized description, is a relationship whereby one gains financially and materially in exchange for sexual relationships. And these relationships, as per, tend to exist between young women and older men. Whereas, prostitution is defined as a person, in particular a woman, who engages in sexual activity for payment. So whilst there are differences in the way that sex and money are exchanged in sugar dating, fundamentally there's the expectation of sex in exchange for money. So they're, I would say, fundamentally the same. So OnlyFans, so it's a social media platform where people subscribe to content creators for a monthly subscription fee, and that's to see pictures and videos of the creator. The platform takes 20% of the earnings from each creator. The site is primarily known for its sexually explicit content with pornography allowed. And it is a UK-based company that was founded in 2016, but it grew exponentially in popularity in 2020 and has continued to grow since. So I'm just going to read some quotes from women that have been sugar babies, as they call it. So this is an anonymous quote from BuzzFeed. So the shopping trips were exciting for someone that grew up poor. It made me feel powerful to be sought after and have men willing to pay to be with me at first. By the end, it left me with much lower self-esteem in myself as a person and unhealthy beliefs about men and relationships. Beliefs like sex is transactional, sex is an obligation, men only want you for your looks and youth, women lose value as they age, men will cheat and leave their wives as they age for someone younger, etc. And here's a quote from Fiona Fraser from the spin-off in 2022. So, when there is an older person with life experience and disposable income dating a younger or more naive person, there's a power imbalance. So many of the issues we see coming through the doors are related to non-payment. We've also supported workers for assault after refusing a specific sex act. There have been threats about rape, bankruptcy, and this really shocked me. So even clients using the Consumer Guarantee Act as a threat to gain sexual consent. So again, another anonymous quote from BuzzFeed. So I'm currently working as a sugar baby to help with college. Some experiences haven't been so good with men I work with pushing boundaries and doing things they didn't have permission to do and so on. But some of it isn't so bad. So on to OnlyFans. So OnlyFans is so popular, it's got over 50 million registered users and 8,000 new content creators a day. Save the Students' annual money survey found that just over a fifth of students, so 22%, have tried using OnlyFans while at uni, while some 4% of students have tried sex work. But despite the endless, so like the quotes I read out at the beginning, despite the endless headlines and song lyrics about how much money is made on OnlyFans, the top 1% of creators take home a majority of the platform's commissions, and this deliberate manipulation of the financial reality makes it like a porn pyramid scheme, with the majority standing to lose more than they gain. So, for instance, content can be very easily leaked, literally at the touch of a button, and then it can be used to harass, bully, and extort. And the leaking of sexually explicit OnlyFans content is so common. There are whole websites and social media accounts boasting the leaked content, which they also profit off as well. And also, as very common with prostitution, as a content creator, you're always expected to do more. Well-known pattern in the sex industry, and in order to keep the subscribers happy, creators find themselves becoming more explicit and potentially pushing past, or likely pushing past, personal boundaries in order to keep up with their subscribers. So all that said, why is there a rise in OnlyFans and sugar dating for university students? So Seeking Arrangements claimed that over 500,000 students had signed up to the platform since 2015. The sugar dating website gives a free premium membership to all students who sign up with a university email. So that's just a complete unashamed targeting of young students exploiting their financial hardship. Financial hardship is often one of the parallels that's given. So the increased cost of university has seen a rise in students involved in it as university fees have gone up, and with the cost of living crisis. Students also cite that their involvement in sex work is for greater flexibility and financial reward compared to traditional part-time work. The other thing is misinformation, as I've spoken about. So going back to those quotes I read out at the beginning, it's a deliberate sanitization of sugar dating and OnlyFans that convinces women that it would be good for them. So currently, this was in 2020, around 4% of students use some form of adult entertainment or, again, sex work to supplement their income, and this has doubled since the 2017 figure, so sharp increases. Again, I was talking about social media, so the sugar baby hashtag has over 1 billion views on TikTok, with videos promoting the lavish lifestyle. All funded by their sugar daddies, and many of these influencers give the impression that they operate these relationships on a solely virtual basis. This is not the case, rarely the case. And then also going back to pop culture, so after Beyonce referenced OnlyFans in one of her song remixes, there was a 15% spike in traffic to the site. So that examples how much influence these people have. And as of August 2022, OnlyFans has an estimate of 278 million monthly visitors. So my view on the rise in sugar dating and OnlyFans, so I'm not an academic, I'm speaking from my own personal experience and that of other young women around me who have had a similar background. So whilst I do believe that financial hardship, misinformation and the glamorization through the media are driving involvement in sugar dating and OnlyFans, I do feel that the issue is far more complex. I believe that what we're seeing is a mass grooming experiment, with the end goal being the capitalization of sex and monetizing young women's bodies and so themselves. So that starts very young. Young girls are taught to be insecure, to put other people's needs first, to be kind and polite, over being honest about their feelings and their boundaries. This lays the groundwork for sexual exploitation. As they grow up and are exposed to porn, which is increasingly violent, they see that women's bodies are to be used, and that apparently the women themselves want this, and that no actually means yes. These beliefs and attitudes are then replayed all around them, and on social media they see image after image of highly sexualized women. And in a social media obsessed world, likes equal validation and self-worth. So if you post a sexualized picture and it gets more likes, you'll post more of the same. And so the line between social media and porn content are ever narrowing, and also is also exampled with sending news being a very commonplace amongst young people. They also listen to music, again, you can, from the quotes that I read out, so they listen to music which is eye-wateringly sexually explicit, promoting the sexualization of women and women sexualizing themselves, and giving the impression of empowerment. They hear about influencers, as I said, making loads of money through sugar dating and OnlyFans and being able to buy lots of nice things. So we live in such a materialistic culture, which is also contrast with the cost of living crisis, that what you possess materially is synonymous with status. And all of this leaves young girls and women traumatized, making them easier to coerce into pornography and prostitution, as they believe that that is what women are for in society. And not only should they not question it, but embrace it. There is also a never-ending silencing of a feminist critique to counter this, and so it feels there is very little refuge from this dominant misogynistic culture where girls and women can shelter. So in my opinion, until the grooming of young girls and women into pornography and prostitution is looked at a process of eroding self-worth and personal boundaries through female socialisation, we're not going to be able to tackle the problem. And I just wanted to add in here, you know, I feel that there's a massive link between early life trauma and sexual exploitation that's not necessarily, people aren't necessarily that aware of it. Young women that are especially vulnerable to sexual exploitation due to early life traumatic experience. So I was abused as a child and put into care and later adopted, and it seems my trauma made me the perfect target, as it does for others that have been through similar experiences. So a lack of self-worth means that we don't have the same boundaries, and so we're much more likely to accept abusive and degrading relationships, partly that being normalised to us, and partly because we don't believe that we deserve better. So we know from research that women who have a history of abuse or of being in care are more likely to be involved with prostitution. And I would say that sugar dating and OnlyFans, as they are extensions of the sex industry, will follow the same pattern, something that I know myself to be true. So as a preteen, I'd already been exposed to the world of online porn. I grew up with the rise of the internet, and as a vulnerable young girl online, I was drawn into talking and webcamming with grown men, paedophiles basically, online. I was bullied at primary and secondary school. However, I noticed that when boys and men began to notice me and pay attention to me, girls' and women's attitudes towards me also changed. So I began to associate appearance with popularity. As a young teenager, I found myself in a physically and sexually abusive relationship. All of these experiences and more, on top of my own trauma, taught me my value is what I can offer as a sexual object. The rise of hookup culture took over whilst I was at university, and I found myself fully immersed. I believed that it was liberating. I partied a lot, drank a lot, and hooked up a lot. Many of the experiences were not hookups, as I've come to realise, but sexually abusive and violent. But oftentimes, due to my past, I was either too drunk or dissociated to know or care. The idea of making these instances transactional made sense, as I thought at the time I could get something out of my destructive behaviour. And I did, and it carried on that way for a couple of years. The bubble burst due to unapologetic feminists around me, and my eyes were open to the sexual and relational trauma I'd experienced with men. I'd been duped. At first I didn't want to admit it, and I felt foolish for being so naive. But I now accept that as a young woman, particularly a vulnerable young woman, due to my past, I had been groomed into hookup and porn culture, and that it had a profound effect upon my self-esteem and the way that I see the world. This is seconded by many women I have spoken with, and I have given examples of women that have come to realise the same cold, hard truth. Having men buy you things or to pay to support a lifestyle in exchange for sexual relationships was not at all empowering. With each exchange, I lost a piece of myself. Such realisations are the reason that I'm here today, using my voice to call out the abusive culture we are currently saturated in. I count myself lucky. I've had women around me that have protected me from being further exploited, and so I'd like to think that I'm returning the favour with this talk. And we need to have these conversations with the women and young girls around us, because they won't hear it elsewhere.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tsitsi Matekaire, and I work for an organization called Equality Now. We are an international women's rights organization that is working to address issues of violence against women and discrimination in the law. And one of our program areas is looking at sexual exploitation and how we can begin to use more of the international frameworks that we have to address sexual exploitation within our different contexts and within our different countries. For this talk, I was asked to speak on the impact of the sex work is work ideology on women in the global south. So I was thinking, where do I start? How do I position this? So I thought, let me go back to my own country, where I was born, and try and see what is it that was happening in that context, or is happening in that context, that can, bring us to an understanding of why the sex work is work ideology is so dominant, even within the African context. So I went back to 1983, which is 40 years ago now. In 1983, the police in Zimbabwe embarked on an operation that they called Operation Cleanup. Operation Cleanup was essentially the police taking to the streets and arresting anyone who was found loitering, anyone that they considered was a vagrant or a prostitute. They swept through the nightclubs of the main towns of Harare and other cities around, and arrested even women who were found on the streets walking home at night. In the end, thousands and thousands of women across the country were arrested for prostitution. Operation Cleanup was essentially based on the notion that good women are not on the street, that these women were making the streets dirty, that good women were supposed to be at home looking after their children, looking after their families, and especially good black women. So women on the streets were considered to be of bad morals, and the law needed to deal with that. So why is it was like that, that the police could just go out and do these operations, that government institutions could take this approach, and mind you, it's an approach that continues to this day. Operation Cleanup happened in the early years of post-colonial Zimbabwe, precisely 3 years after the declaration of independence from Britain. In the Zimbabwean context, as reflected in other countries across Africa with similar social setups and colonial histories, the social structure, by and large, positions women at the lowest rank of the social ladder. So back then, in the 1980s, African women were at the bottom of the ladder because of a combination of factors, which still remain today to a large extent. Patriarchy being one, which ranked within Zimbabwe and other countries that were under colonial rule. The white male was at the top, the white woman, the black man, and then the black woman right at the end. And the colonial laws agreed with this hierarchy. It was not until 1982 in Zimbabwe that black women could enter into contracts, could open a bank account, could buy property, could inherit property. Essentially, even though as black women we could go to school and we could work, we were not our own people and always belonged to and were always subordinate to one male or the other. Our purpose was to put up with the demands of our male relatives and by extension to the male species in general. Good women were supposed to behave in a certain way and be submissive to this male authority. So that is the context of a moralistic approach which was supported by the law and government institutions and is still very much dominant in many African countries today, supported by our penal codes, which criminalize public indecency, living off the proceeds of prostitution, and essentially criminalizing women that are bought and sold in the sex trade. And the arrest of women on prostitution or loitering charges continues today across many African countries. There was a report just a couple of weeks ago on the 8th of October where 8 women were arrested in Nigeria and assaulted by the police using their public decency laws. So within that sort of context of post-colonial, police brutality, these public indecency laws and so on, what we began to see was a rise of women's movements protesting this police brutality. And on reflection, I believe it is one of the factors that has helped to build the full decriminalization agenda, because it's almost saying the only way to move from full criminalization, which is really around women, is to move to full decriminalization. And this approach does not see a third way, which is the Nordic model. It's almost as simplistic. We move from full criminalization to full decriminalization. And of course, another factor as well within the African context was HIV and AIDS. We saw in the 80s and 90s countries like Zimbabwe, other countries in Southern Africa, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, Malawi, as far east as Kenya, west in Ghana, where we had the HIV and AIDS pandemic really ravaging our communities and our countries. And then you have the epidemiologists, is that what they are called, the people that are looking at epidemics and, you know, UN agencies and so on, coming in and saying, oh, sex workers are, you know, a vulnerable group, and we need to look at ways in which they can access health. And then it became about harm reduction, about access to health, without actually addressing the root causes of prostitution. So this is where we sort of ended up, a context of two narratives: a moralistic argument that calls for full criminalization of prostitution, and there's a lot of support from deeply conservative sectors of our societies on one hand, and then on the other you have the sex work is work argument, which is seen as the solution to the criminalization agenda, and one that will supposedly free women from the shackles of morality and the lack of control over their bodies. So in reality, actually, when you look at the criminalization agenda, it's really criminalizing and stigmatizing those that are bought and sold in the sex trade. If you look at countries that fully implement this approach, like South Africa, what we actually see is that it is women that are being brutalized. And on the other hand, you have the sex work is work ideology, which is saying this is my body, this is my choice. It's about liberating us as women, so we can choose sex work, we can even migrate for sex work, and therefore we need laws that will reflect that choice, and full decriminalization of the sex trade will work. But actually, when you look at the experiences of women in Africa, in the diaspora communities and amongst migrant women, the experiences tell us a very different story. And that this move from criminalization to full decriminalization does not address the fundamental causes and drivers of prostitution, which is a form of sexual exploitation. It doesn't tell us around, it doesn't help us to get into discussions around vulnerabilities within our communities that are arising from poverty and very limited choices to make a living that traffickers and sex buyers are taking advantage of. It doesn't get to the story of generational prostitution and sexual exploitation that results from poverty, from caste-based systems, from discrimination and marginalization over years that sees generations of women, their daughters and their granddaughters being exploited in the sex trade. It doesn't tell us about the experiences of young women and girls who are coerced and sold to tourists and travelers in Africa's tourist destinations. If you look at the level of sexual exploitation and prostitution in the tourism industries in countries like Kenya, in the Gambia, it's atrocious and at a scale that is, totally unacceptable. It doesn't tell us of women and girls that are trafficked out of their countries to meet the demand that is being generated by men in the West and men in America and so on. It doesn't tell us of university students that are pushed into transactional sex as sugar daddies because they cannot pay their university fees, or of lecturers who are sexually exploiting their students for sex to give them good grades. There was a documentary that was produced by the BBC looking at the sex for grades issue in countries like Nigeria and Ghana. And in one of those, two of the lecturers were suspended without pay. So that's all they got, a suspension without pay. And also, I think as we have heard from other speakers before, these are not just African problems, but these are global problems, because the system of patriarchy and male dominance are the same, whether you're in Europe or whether you're in Africa. And the laws that we currently have that are not looking at equality, which is what the Nordic model is really about, about equality, that we need to address the root causes and address inequality and discrimination, that we need to look at the demand, that we need to be supporting women in the sex trade and supporting their exit, that our laws currently are not actually fit for purpose. So the impact of the sex work is real work ideology pushes the struggles of women in the global south away from the national debate and away from state accountability, especially the need for our governments to address the root causes that breed vulnerability to exploitation. It also perpetuates the culture of male impunity. In my culture, there's a saying that men are perpetual minors, that they are perpetual children. And as women, we should treat them as perpetual children. They don't really know what they are doing. They are just like children. So as women, we should be mothering to our husbands and mothering to the men in our communities. And then this just means that men can get away with so many things. They can get away with buying sex. They can get away with domestic violence. They can get away with any other form of, sexual or gender-based or violence against women. And we see this in our communities at every point. And it fails to acknowledge as well the long-term and intergenerational trauma that is experienced by women as a result of sexual exploitation. So whilst there's a lot of push within the African context, for instance, for full decriminalization of the sex trade, I think what we are also beginning to see is a growing movement for equality model approaches. We see this from organizations in South Africa like Embrace Dignity, who are really working hard to ensure that the government in South Africa adopts the Nordic model. And we also see it in countries like Malawi, where some of the partners are beginning to, or local organizations are beginning to partner with people like the Coalition Against Prostitution to try and see how they can work together to ensure that the Nordic model or the equality approach is adopted within their countries. I think to sort of conclude it, I would say, we should be looking more at global movement building. This is an issue that is pertinent here in the UK, as it is also pertinent and crucial in South Africa or Kenya or other countries. So as activists or as people that support the Nordic model, how do we come together and really build a global movement that will help us push for these issues? How do we strengthen global solidarity so that our fight here in the UK can also be supported by women, in other countries? So yeah, I would conclude by saying there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but collectively, as women across the globe, we can bring the change that we want to see. Thank you. So our next speaker is Robert Jensen, but he can't be with us today, but he has recorded a talk, especially for the event, which will be played now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, greetings from northern New Mexico in the United States. It's a pleasure to be with you, even if only online. It would be an even greater pleasure to be there and be with you all. But I'm happy I can participate even in this somewhat inadequate way. I want to talk a bit today about feminism and prostitution and start by remembering my first exposure to the idea of prostitution, which I recall as being Xavier's Hollander's best-selling book, The Happy Hooker, which was published in 1971 when I was 13 years old. Eventually, some of the several million copies of that book that were sold ended up in used bookstores, including one in Fargo, North Dakota, where I grew up and where I regularly rummaged through cheap paperbacks. I was too afraid to do more than look at the cover and then quickly put it back on the shelf. But the book taught me that using women that way was exciting, was one thing that boys could look forward to. Now, at the time, I couldn't know that that book's approach to prostitution, what we might call the empowerment story that presents a sexually self-assured woman rejecting puritanical judgment and choosing to make a living selling sex. I didn't know that that would become dogma, not only among liberal and left men, but also for a significant segment of the feminist movement. The book featured what would become two linchpins of that liberal embrace of prostitution. One, it's just a job, and two, we should respect women's choices. Well, at the time, being a good liberal, I accepted those two claims. That changed when I was 30 years old and I began reading radical feminist writing and meeting radical feminist women. That's when I stopped using terms like hooker and realized there was very little happiness in the sexual exploitation industries, which include street prostitution, brothels, massage parlors, pornography, online performances, strip clubs. In the critique of the empowerment story we're going to discuss today, I just want to suggest some simple ways we can respond to those liberal rationalizations and keep the focus on patriarchy and the other systems of oppression. So let's start with the idea that sex work is work, which defenders of the sexual exploitation industries love to declare. Well, on a superficial level, that's partially accurate. In patriarchal societies, people, mostly female, but also male in some cases, can earn money by allowing the almost exclusively male sex buyers to use their bodies for sexual pleasure. And this is a kind of work. But important questions remain. What else is sex work besides work? What does sex work tell us about our society? Does treating the buying and selling of objectified female bodies for male sexual pleasure, treating that as work, does that make it easier to challenge patriarchy? Well, I'll come back to these questions at the end, but for right now, let's ask some additional questions about this concept of sex work. First, is it possible to imagine any society achieving a meaningful level of justice if people from one sex gender class are routinely bought and sold for sexual services by people from another sex gender class? If one class of people are defined as available to be bought and sold for sexual services, is there any way that class of people that does most of the selling would not be assigned subordinate status to the dominant class that does almost all of the buying? In other words, is justice possible when the most intimate spaces of the bodies of people in one group can be purchased by people in another group? Let's ask the same question, just stated a little differently. If we lived in an egalitarian society with sex gender justice, would the idea of buying and selling people for sexual services likely emerge at all? If we lived in a society that put the dignity of all people at the center of its mission, would anyone even imagine sex work? Here's another formulation. You're constructing a society from scratch with the power to not only write laws, but also to write the stories people tell themselves. Would you write stories about how one sex gender class routinely buys and sells another sex gender class for sexual pleasure? Here's the last question to challenge us. You're speaking with a girl who is considering future vocations. You want her to live in a world with sex gender justice. She asks you, what do you think I should do when I grow up? Do you include prostitute on the list? If she includes it on her list, do you respond in the same way as you would to other possibilities? These are questions that ask us to think about the nature of a system and the predictable consequences of the status and power relations among members of different groups within the system. This inquiry is not a judgment about how any individual makes decisions within the existing patriarchal system. Instead, it's an exercise in imagining the shape of a non-patriarchal system. This kind of radical analysis does not ignore individuals. It doesn't ignore their decisions. It simply starts with the system within which they live. In patriarchy, the value of some women can be reduced to their ability to sexually service men, which means that any woman potentially can be reduced to that status. Well, let's move on to this question of choice. Liberals love to emphasize individual choices. Respecting the agency of another person requires us to freely accept their freely made choices. And if a person is not subject to force, fraud, or coercion, which is a key part of the definition of trafficking, liberals tend to assume that a person's choice is free. And again, at a superficial level, that makes some sense. But any serious analysis has to go beyond an individual's choice in a specific moment and ask about the conditions under which we make choices. A meaningful discussion of choice must include all the background conditions that affect not only the objective choices available, but the subjective assessment of those choices that any person makes. Well, from the research and the testimony of women who have been prostituted, we know quite a bit. We know that key factors in many women's decisions to enter the sexual exploitation industry are childhood sexual assault, which often leads victims to see their value in the world primarily as the ability to provide sexual pleasure for men, and economic hardship, a lack of meaningful employment opportunities at a livable wage. We know how women in the sexual exploitation industry, not every single one, of course, but many of them, routinely dissociate to cope with the work they do. In one study of 130 street prostitutes, 68% met the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. We also know that pimps often use coercion and violence to keep women working as prostitutes. In the words of one team of researchers that reviewed the research from 9 countries, prostitution is multi-traumatic. And so, not surprisingly, 89% of those women who were prostituted said they wanted to leave prostitution, but felt they did not have other options. Well, let's step back. Are women working under such conditions making a meaningful choice? There's, of course, no simple answer to that question. In emphasizing this complexity, it doesn't mean we are treating the women like children or ignoring their agency or asserting somehow they are dupes with no self-awareness. It's simply recognizing the reality of the world in which we live and in which they work, as it's called. At the very least, it should give pause to anyone who wants to make glib assertions about choice in the sexual exploitation industries. There are, of course, no doubt some women in prostitution who make relatively free choices. But the question is, are they representative of most women in the sexual exploitation industries? And before we leave this question of choice, let's not forget we need to analyze men's choices as well. Men who choose to buy sex, to act like Johns, are considerably freer and don't face the same constraints that define the lives of most prostituted women. So we would ask, why do men choose to buy and sell for sexual pleasure objectified female bodies and also sometimes objectified male bodies? In other words, why are men so willing to choose to reduce the richness and complexity of sexual experience to the buying and selling of objectified bodies? That's a real choice men make. Well, let's move on and talk about patriarchy, because in analyses of the sexual exploitation industries, all roads lead to patriarchy, and the way in patriarchy that men are socialized to seek power over women, as well as power over men in other competitive situations. Patriarchy is the foundational system of oppression in human history going back several thousand years. But of course, we don't ignore the other oppressive systems, most notably in our moment in history, white supremacy, first world power over the developing world, and economic inequality and capitalism, all of which go back several hundred years. In the sexual exploitation industries, we see all these systems at work together, which is hardly surprising given that they are all based on attempts to naturalize a domination-subordination dynamic. All of these systems, what they try and do is persuade us that these differences in status and wealth and power are natural and can't be changed, that they are just the way things are and always will be. So, given all these systems, it's not surprising that women from the global south and other economically depressed areas are prostituted in affluent countries. It's not surprising that pornography is the most explicitly racist media genre in the world today. It's not surprising that in a capitalist economy that encourages the commodification of everything, capitalists use new technologies in so-called innovative ways to buy and sell objectified female bodies for men's sexual pleasure. By now, you've probably figured out that I try to use the term sexual exploitation industries and the phrase, the buying and selling of objectified female bodies for men's sexual pleasure, as often as I can. And I encourage everyone to do that. I think it's a way through language we can fight the liberal rationalizations of these oppressive systems of power that are embedded in the terms sex work and choice. So let's sum up simply by returning to the questions I posed earlier. What else is sex work besides work? Well, quite clearly from the research and experience of women, it is sexual exploitation. What does sex work tell us about our society? It tells us that even with the significant legal and cultural changes that feminism has won in the last century, and it has won many changes, that even with those changes, men in patriarchy continue to act as if their sexual pleasure is more important than women's freedom. Third, does treating the buying and selling of objectified female bodies for male sexual pleasure as work, does that make it easier to challenge patriarchy? And the answer is clearly no, especially when liberal and postmodern feminists join with men to treat men's claim to sexual access to women as more important than women's freedom. I think a defense of the sexual exploitation industries is possible only if we believe that men have a right to whatever sexual pleasure they want, that women must accept this, and that choices of individuals within oppressive systems are somehow more important than the collective struggles to change those systems. And that's what I learned feminism is all about, the collective struggle. Women, of course, at the lead, but men in solidarity to change those systems that none of us can justify. Thanks.
Thank you, panel, for speaking so eloquently and bravely. You haven't finished yet, so no getting up, Fiona.
Just a bit of a stretch.
Yeah. So it's the Q&A. We've got a few questions from Slido, which is excellent. And also we're going to be having a few roving microphones later on. So if you do want to ask a question, have a think, and then we'll do the old school method of putting your hand up. This subject's very emotive and it can be really challenging, as we know. So I'm just going to request, in fact, that we're respectful with the questions and the answers. We may not agree, but the debate is necessary, no matter how challenging it is. Okay, so let's have a look. So the first question is to Fiona, and it is by anonymous. Thank you for your speech. Could you give an account of your journey out of the sex trade?
We've got 3 weeks.
Keep it
I made
short.
many attempts to exit the sex trade. The first one was when I was left for dead by a man who'd pimped me for 5 years and beat the absolute shit out of me. I was hospitalised, I went mute, I couldn't speak. I was found in a flat in London. 6 weeks into my hospital stay, I was assaulted by a man on a ward because it were a mixed ward. And I signed myself out of hospital and found a woman in Leeds where I were on the streets. I were on the streets in almost every city. I trafficked all around the country. And she used to stop and she used to speak to me with human compassion. And I could never, and my wall would come down immediately. So none of the supporting women out of the sex trade is rocket science. It's, you know, basic human compassion that worked for me initially. I went to stay with her. My perpetrator found me, kicked off the door, kicked out my teeth, and I went into a refuge where I couldn't talk about the sex trade because at that time refuges would not take women who were exiting prostitution. I kept my head down. I didn't tell them about the prostitution. I told them about the domestic violence. I got a key worker. I got a placement in a college because I wanted to do childcare. I didn't want to be around another fucking human adult. I didn't want to be around adults because I didn't feel safe. Because women in the sex trade had harmed me too. Some of the managers, some of the brothel owners, some of the health workers who reduced me to a vagina and vein. I got my head down, got on with my college course, did really well, and then it came to the practical placement and I had to have a DBS, which is a criminal history check, obviously when you're working with vulnerable children. It came back as a catalogue of offences. I had 8-page, double-sided criminal record. I went straight back into the life. I was told I couldn't continue the course. I went back into the life. I went back into the life in brothels, telling myself, I'm all right, this is okay, this is fine. Drinking, smoking weed till I was green. You know, it's okay, I'm okay, this is okay, I'm fine, scrub, Dettol, blah, blah. Fucked again, fucked a bit more. And then one day I was getting ready to go to the brothel and I saw the news and I was shocked into a harsh reality when a member of my family, a young woman, had been found murdered by a sex buyer in Bradford. He'd been released after getting away with murdering another young woman who was 19, but he got off on the grounds of provocation and got 2 years. And that was the straw that brought the camel's back for me. I got out, but it never leaves you. Never leaves you. And I fight every day of my life to stand against this bullshit notion that it's sex work. I fucking fight and fight and fight.
Thank you.
Anyway.
Thank you.
A long answer to a very short question, but...
Any hands up from the floor? I can't really see. I'm blinded by the light here. Over there, Anna, I can see the hand. Yeah.
Thank you very much for all four of you. And I agree completely with Fiona. We have to call out the demand because I think that's key. Patricia's my name. I'm a Catholic nun. I have been working with women who are in this position for a long time. I have a lot of colleagues doing the same, not just in this country, but also right across the world. My question is to Chelsea. when some of our sisters in 1983 were persuaded so much to vote for the decriminalization, and some of them admitted that they did, they now see the folly of that. Is there a corresponding movement in New Zealand to have either equality now or the Nordic model now? Because I believe firmly that that's the only way forward.
In New Zealand, people don't really give prostitution any mind anymore. They feel like it's been dealt with and it's over. So there aren't any, groups specifically working for the Nordic model. There's a few women like me. There's one woman, Ellie Marie Diamond, who I think is trying to bring something together, but there's nothing.
Okay, thank you. One more question from the floor. I think there's over there. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Amazing talks, thanks very much. I've got a bit of a long question, which I might take a long time to figure out, but I kind of think from your stories, I think we're living in a situation, it's like that science fiction film, They Live. So we're living with all this stuff around us all the time, but it's only when you put on the glasses that you see the reality of it. But the science fiction breaks down because, as Lulu says, it's just everywhere. It's in all the dramas, it's in the TV shows, it's in the storylines. You can't turn on Netflix. I'm gonna apply for some research to do this, because within the first 5 minutes, there's either a pornographic scene or there's a woman screaming, running away. So we're kind of what's going on culturally is having a very profound effect. Even if there are cases where people are clearly distressed, clearly experiencing pain, the figures in your experience who helped you to create change, there's so few of them around, and there's so few of us here. Well, there's a lot of us here, that's good. But how do we mobilize our resources to become those figures in the world where we can be that kind of person for somebody else? How do we create that kind of effective critical mass to start changing, to start basically getting people to take off these glasses that everything, because they know it's not fine, but what do we need to do? What's your answer?
Who would like to answer that question? It's quite a profound one. It's quite all-encompassing.
The question is, how do we...
So many of these stories about meeting somebody who understood you, like Chelsea talked about the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist just reinforced the dominant paradigm that laid the blame on her at her doorstep. Lulu talked about the culture around. There seems to be a figure, there seems to be somebody like a figure in people's lives that make this different. So I guess I'm asking, how do we create more of these figures, these personal contacts that are going to be these change makers?
So it's basically an advocate or a
friend.
Like
maybe we should really take on the role. I mean, not just have a conversation, but say I'm in this role now, or maybe it doesn't work. You see,
Yeah, I think perhaps we'll come back to that later, maybe after our afternoon session, because I think that's quite an overarching question. Yeah, panel, how do you feel about that? We'll come back to that later, perhaps.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it sometimes as well, organisations are quite, it's really about just, like you were saying as well, just having that person there that you can just speak to, and it doesn't need to be through an organisation. It can just be, how you doing, and really meaning it, because you can tell when someone's like a therapist or that's, it feels very different. But when when you're just there for someone and you just accept them and accept their story, I think that's when, because I think it's to do with like self-worth and things like that. So once you realise, wow, this person actually is just giving me a space to speak and accepts me as another human being, I think that really is a game changer. I think it's just, if as women we can just give that to other women, I think that's where it starts, and then they see that and it becomes like a chain. But that, yeah, that's...
Okay, thank you, Lulu. I'm going to take one from Slido here. There we go. Here we go. Chelsea, this is from Anonymous. Thank you for your sobering account of how New Zealand women are exploited from every possible angle. Your strength is astounding. How widely are the realities of New Zealand sex trade discussed openly? Are accounts like yours known about? And how do you envisage the international community helping draw attention to the lived realities of these? So it's basically, you know, is it discussed openly? Is your society aware?
What do you mean?
Or is it hidden? So it's how your account, who you are and how you advocate, how well known are you in New Zealand, or is it just an international?
I feel like no one's interested really in hearing anything we have to say in New Zealand, but people overseas have shown a lot of interest. Yeah.
So in your home country, there's not much interest at all?
I think there's one group called Street Reach who sort of talk to women on the streets, and maybe they'd listen. I don't think anyone else would. Like, there's no services for us. There's nothing.
So no organisations?
No one's
nothing.
interested.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. Anybody else from... Yeah, go on, carry on.
Just something that, just with all of this, you know, prostitution, being in prostitution is the loneliest world. I in my experience, so lonely. You can't trust anyone. You can't build healthy relationships. You can't. It's just, yeah, lonely. But the journey out of it is lonely too. So when I hear that there's no one giving a shit about the women in New Zealand, the girls in New Zealand, when I hear this. How do you know, because I came across a lot of pro-sex work people in this country and trying to shut me up, trying to silence me, reporting me to benefits, so I didn't get any benefits because they thought I were being, sabotaging me because they didn't want me to say my truth and they didn't want people to hear the truth. I just, honestly, just massive respect for women who have to do that without... Our sisterhood saves us as well, it just saves us. So, anyway, I don't know.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? I think there's a woman at the back there.
I just wanted to ask specifically about campuses, in this country, student campuses, and whether there are any organisations or ways of helping students who are struggling, or whether there's any organisations going in to try and support and give this message on campus, or whether it's allowed to happen as well, whether organisations or people are allowed to come and say this on campuses in the current climate. Thank you.
Lou, do you think you'll be able to answer that?
Sorry, what services are available to students, did you say?
Financial help, and also is this message allowed to be broadcast on campus?
Obviously you can get like student loans and things like that, but I worked. I did other stuff, but I did actually do actual work whilst at uni. But in terms of financial support and things like that. I'm not aware of any. And in terms of sort of support for students, I mean, actually, there was a counsellor, and I was involved with a counsellor, and he was literally the creepiest guy like I've ever met. And you know, just he would be like, "You're so amazing," and it was really, you know, and again, we live in a culture where it's like, you know, as Chelsea was saying, you just affirm this idea of sex work being work. I mean, I didn't kind of get into that kind of stuff, but from my understanding of, you know, universities, I mean, they've got like different guides on, you know, like how to do safe sex work and all of this kind of stuff, and there's very much a silencing of, you know, you can't talk about the harms of prostitution and pornography, and so you can't really get that like objective critical perspective. And I think that's why feminism and things like Nordic Model Now are so important. But then in the same sense, I think, as we were saying, the first step before that is just other, you know, because if I've spoken to friends about it, they'll be like, oh, that's really cool, oh, that's great. And because you also want to maintain this idea that this is really beneficial to me, because you have to keep convincing yourself that what you're doing is the right thing. And so when you talk to other women, again, because of the culture, it's like that reinforcing of the same ideas. So I don't think.
Nordic Model do have a supporting students impacted by the sex industry handbook for universities and students. It's downloadable from the website. You can buy it for £3 at a reduced rate. It's on the back, so
It's brilliant.
So
brilliant.
That handbook is there, and it really does need to be distributed to universities. So if you do work in a university or have, you know, students, I would really recommend this toolkit, basically. So yeah, it's all in there.
I think what happens when you do request to do maybe debates or discussions or events at university, you're cancelled because you're a swerve, and you're hated and you're trolled, and there's no place to have that healthy debate without being called hateful, and they just want that sex work narrative. They don't want to hear the truth about prostitution.
Right, another question from Slido. This is for C. This is anonymous. In addition to the economical effects, are there additional effects of post-colonialism on the increase in prostitution in Africa? So, in addition to the economical effects, is there additional effects of post-colonialism on the increase of prostitution in African countries?
Yeah. I think I would sort of say it's, you know, the same factors in any context would also apply in Africa. So, you know, issues like poverty, you know, lack of livelihoods, I think that's a big factor. We've also seen quite recently issues around climate change for many communities that are agro-based. So we've seen, you know, sort of massive droughts in East Africa. We've also seen that in Southern Africa. And then that just means people don't, you know, whereas they could live off their land, now they've nothing else to live on. So it's all of those combinations, issues around conflict as well, and displacement. So it's sort of all of those factors, you know, the economy, climate change, humanitarian crisis, coming together and then pushing the prostitution industry. Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? I can't really see at the moment. Anna, I think there's someone on the left there. Yeah.
So I work for a university, and I suppose to response to the lady over here a moment ago, we do have a hardship fund, which we do advertise, but of course many students might not be aware of it, and therefore, and like I say, then the student kind of zeitgeist right now, it is all this, oh, like you can just do this and it's fine. And so some people might not even think about that as an option that they can reach out to. But my question was kind of, again, it was about universities, and when we have universities where basically all the talks that I see my university do on the issues of prostitution and sex work related things has been sex workers' work. And that's all that they seem to platform. So I suppose the question is, how do we get them to change that?
I don't know.
I guess it's just even if you got to stand up and you got to say something and you got to form groups and just be unapologetic and relentless. That's the only way it's going to change. That's why we have feminism. That's why we have groups like Nordic Model Now. It's because women have just said, I'm not fucking shutting up about this.
Absolutely. It's up to the universities to step up. If there's loads of academic papers on sex workers' work, blah blah blah. If you believe and you are part of a university, and you stand against that, then organise. Organise it.
I'm going to take another question from the floor, I think on the right-hand side here. Sorry, I did kind of see.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you've said. It's been really, really thought-provoking and quite emotive. I'm from university in Stoke-on-Trent, and one of my roles is sexual violence liaison officer. And some of the training that I've done with students, I've ended up getting disclosures about OnlyFans and working on OnlyFans, mixed sex as well. So recently I had a gay lad that told me he was actively on there with his partner, who's also a student. One of the other things that I'm doing at the moment is doing a master's, and that's solely looking at student debt and how we can help students. And my next project is looking at student sex work. And one of the things we really need at universities is we need that person who students feel comfortable coming to talk to and disclose to without feeling judged. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be looking at in this project, because we do need that support. But from what you've said, I've written loads of stuff down, so thank you so much. One of the questions was, when we do have a student disclosing that they're recently on OnlyFans and that they're engaging in that, what is your advice to say to them, particularly where they've not disclosed that there's been any sexual abuse previously, that it's purely to make money? What do you think of that, and what's your feedback?
I mean, like I was saying, obviously I didn't cover all of the potential risks, but there's like a lot of them. And again, this is part of the issue, is that there's a massive glamorization, and people aren't necessarily aware. And I think that just kind of, it will come through, but it's how do we protect those people now? And I think, maybe just in terms of the work that you do, if you could, or even putting something together, because this is the thing, you don't obviously want to come across as telling someone what to do, but just putting together something that says these are the risks. Because it's so easy, to take the content and then that can be used, to harass people and so on. I think as well part of the issue is that there's this kind of culture of just it's totally fine. And I think, I've been in groups before. I was part of this, it was like a 12-week self-esteem course with other women. And I do think sometimes that can get through to people more than talking about specifically the issue. But yeah, definitely having something put together that specifies all of the different risks and potential harms, and then also asking, you know, why are you doing this, and digging a bit deeper. But that's some people aren't ready for that. So I'd say, first of all, having something put together that explains all of the different potential risks, and then maybe longer term, looking at some kind of, I mean, mental health services are so strapped at the minute, you know, it's like nearly impossible, and they cost money as well, unless you want to wait 2 years. But then also maybe having some resources on, you know, just self-esteem and self-worth building. I think that those would probably be quite effective.
The sex work stuff as well. I mean, interestingly, the term sex worker came from an academic in an ivory tower. I know no woman, and I've supported women internationally for over 2 decades, that has ever endorsed the term sex work. It's been given to us. It's groomed girls and young women and vulnerable boys and young men to the notion and idea, so call it out. You are not insulting, you're not going to insult anyone. You're going to awaken them. You're going to give them permission to speak about what's really fucking going on for them. Because it ain't rainbows and unicorns, let me tell you. And we need to name this shit and not sanitize it and not, you know, normalise and legitimise it. Name it. And I'm telling you now, the walls will come down.
All right, we have enough time for one more question. Let's see, let's go near the front. Anna? Yeah. Just down here. Right in the middle. Making it difficult for you, sorry.
Thank you. How does someone who, I've never experienced sexual exploitation, so how would someone like me in my position begin to counteract this notion on like a more public sphere without coming across as judgmental or dismissive, or is that even a possibility? And how would I do that?
The woman who used to stop me on the street, the only person who ever really was warm to me or kind to me in the years that I were used as a piece of shit, piece of meat, she said to me, I don't like what's happening to you. You're a beautiful young woman. I don't support that women and girls should be. She just talked to me about it. And my bricks came down. I didn't feel offended by her words. We're so worried about, we're more worried about offending vulnerable women and girls than we are about them being anally fucking raped, murdered, shagged sideways and all the rest of it. And we're more, you know, we're more bothered about upsetting the academics, and we have to just get to the root of this bullshit. And I'm glad people are, you know, you've got to be sensitive and compassionate and understanding and all that, but that comes from your body language, from your tone, from loads of things. We don't have to stand in collusion with bullshit notions that prostitution is work. You know, we do not have to. And I'm telling you, you'll save lives. You'll save lives. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, panel, for answering the questions with your insight. We're going to be breaking for lunch shortly. There is a small cafe just through there selling drinks and snacks and sandwiches and so on. There are loads of cafes just High Holborn way. You've got the usual chains. So that's open. There's also a little cafe in the square, which looks quite cute. Yeah, so please do look at the stalls at the back. Don't have a peruse, and please, 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 I did mention this. It's really good work in this handbook here, supporting students impacted by the sex industry. And if you do have any children, nephews, nieces, grandchildren, direct them towards this. Buy it. It's fairly cheap. It's free to download. Before you leave, we have got something very important. Fiona's got a task for you. If you could do that over lunch. Fiona?
Yeah, sorry to put you off your sarnies, but... so I've trained professionals for many, many, many years, and you always get a few who keep on badgering, but this is sex work, this is choice, this is empowering, blah, blah, blah. So I came up with the idea of writing a job description and person spec as part of the training. And I split everybody into groups, and they go away full of joviality and giggling away and wondering how marvellous this exercise is going to be. And they come back traumatised by the words. Now, after lunch, we're going to look at, okay, if this is a job like any other, let's think about your skills. Let's think about your previous experience. Let's think about, what qualities, what knowledge, whatever we need to do this sex work thing. Please refrain from polite language. I want this real, name that violence, and let's just think about.
Right, so the afternoon session's going to begin at 2. So if you could be seated just before 2, please, because we're going to start promptly. Have a great lunch.